It is time. We're going to jump in here. I want to say good afternoon to everybody. We're so excited to welcome you finally to the launch of the Strong Start Network. We are more than thrilled to jump into this journey with you. All right, so Lindsay, if you want to advance the slide, we'll take just a moment as a group before we jump in to just discuss how we can maximize our experience together as a learning community on Zoom. Okay. At least for the time being, while we can't be together in person. Of course, ideally, we would have kind of kicked all this off with some in-person a couple days, but hey, we'll take what we can get. So I wanted to point out a few features. I know many of you are familiar, but just to point out how we'll engage together. Please note your microphone and video buttons. Keep yourself muted if you're not speaking at the moment. That will help us with background noise. And I know it's awkward, but we would love to see your faces, especially as this is more than just a webinar, right? This is the start of a learning community. So we're going to get to know each other a little bit over the course of the sessions that we'll be in together to kick this off. So if you can, turn on that video as well. We'll also be using the chat feature. Looks like the little speech bubble. And then in a little bit, we'll jump into some breakout rooms, but we'll give some more detailed information about that as we get a little bit closer to that time. All right, so again, we're launching a learning community. So I thought it was fitting to take just a moment and talk about our learning space. We want folks, everyone, please feel comfortable participating in this learning space today. I know, like I said, it can be awkward, especially on Zoom, but hey, we can be awkward together. And there'll be many opportunities for us to share in discussion. I mentioned breakout rooms, and we'll be using the chat feature. So really engage and dig into this learning together. All of us, we bring, different knowledge bases and different experiences to this community. So it's just important that we all share those with each other so we can learn from each other. And, maybe have a little fun. I know it's 3:33 in the afternoon after a busy day, and this is going to 5:30. But I hope that in this learning space, we can take a deep breath, maybe let some of the stresses go as tried as maybe that sounds, but just enjoy being together as we kick off this community together. Also, a quick reminder about some logistical aspects of our learning, and that'll take us to the Strong Start Network website. So you received several emails from Brittany Sieber, our communications coordinator, highlighting that we'll use the website as really the hub of operations. So you'll see announcements there, you'll see our calendar, meeting information, our Zoom links are embedded in that calendar, and all the resources that we'll use for our interaction. So just encourage you to bookmark that site for easy access. And I can actually take just a moment and I'll drop that into the chat so it's a little easier for you to find. All right, so again, like I said a minute ago, ideally we would have been in person and have taken a couple days together to get to know each other and get to know and explore the content of our learning as a middle school learning community. But for the time being, we're going to do some very quick introductions, and then over the course of the next several times we're together, we'll kind of layer in additional experiences to get to know each other and more about our work. So real quickly, I want to introduce Dr. Richard Kitzmiller. He is our project director for the Rural Life Grant, and in his spare time, the vice president of the Niswonger Foundation. And you see me there, Bethany Fillers. I'm the director of professional learning for Rural Life. Also, in just a moment, I'll introduce Lindsay Frigo. She is a director at TNTP, and she'll actually be facilitating this session. Let's see, also Dr. Jetta Donovan, some of you met her. She led some of our learning series sessions, our Strong Start Learning Series sessions back in the fall. She's currently on maternity leave, but she'll be back with us after the new year. Also from TNTP, Reagan Kelly, so you might see her out there and she'll join in some of our fun today. Now back on our team, John Payne, Director of Technology and Innovation. He's the man behind the breakout room. So we are so appreciative of him for helping us man those. And then Brittany Sieber, who I mentioned a moment ago, our communications coordinator. You've received lots of emails from her. Next, I'll do a quick shout out to all of our coaches. Again, don't have time to introduce everybody fully, but just real quickly, we've got Dr. Tracy Ballou, Candace Carpenter-Herman, Brooke Drennan, and then we have Dr. Catherine Edwards, Sarah Kitzmiller, Linda Stewart, and Brandy Wilson out there. supporting this work. And now really more importantly, it's you guys, right? In a future session, we'll introduce you all more as school teams, but wanted to give a quick shout out in this session to our county. So Carter County is a part of this network, along with Hamlin and Hawkins County. We've got Greene County, Jefferson County, and Cott County, all part of our middle school learning community. Again, more to come in the future. All right, so real quickly, some of you may be wondering, well, sometimes she says Rural Live, sometimes she says Strong Start Network. I'm confused. Are they the same? Are they different? Well, they go together. And I thought I'd take just a moment to ground us in at how this kind of network came to be. So in 2017, the Niswonger Foundation received an Education, Innovation, and Research Grant, or it's called an EIR grant from the federal government. And we launched the Literacy Initiative Focused on Effectiveness, or Rural Life. And really our goal is to support middle grades literacy instruction. And so that's unique. You know, there's a lot of work in the early grades and in high school. What's neat about this grant is that it's squarely on the middle grades. And for us, it's about bringing together research and best practice from personalized learning and literacy, and think about how that can be used to improve instruction and outcomes for students. So most of you are familiar with Rural Life because you were part of a phase 1 school last 2 years doing that work with our coaches, or you're currently a part of a phase 2 school working with coaches. But also our work has included this year sustainability grants as a way for those phase 1 schools to kind of keep the work going. And another way that we're really kind of spreading the impact of Rural Life is through this Strong Start Network. And so that's where the Strong Start Network came from, really a learning community designed to provide specific support for middle school ELA instruction. So our goals as a network include, really it's twofold, and you've seen this, you saw it in your application, but just to kind of get us all on the same page again. First and foremost, offer members a community of support focused on learning and implementing our newly adopted ELA materials. I mean, wow, that would have been a lift outside of the impact we know COVID is having on the way we're teaching and learning right now. But with also kind of in addition to that was to establish a regional community of lead learners, right? That you all made up of individuals who would both champion, yes, the challenging sometimes, but also rewarding work of improving student outcomes, again, at the middle school level in our literacy classrooms. So who's a part of this journey? And then after this, we'll talk about what it's going to look like in practice. One, teams of lead learners, that's what I said a moment ago, really committed to better understanding and improving middle school literacy instruction. So that's you all, right? The teams, the members of the network. Secondly, experienced educational leaders who guide this type of improvement work in 3 areas: rigorous academics, educator and leader talent, and supportive environments. And that's our national partner, TNTP, who we're just thrilled to be working with for this project. And then lastly, local support that brings together schools and districts, right, and our national partners, and really to make a space for us to kind of tackle together some common educational problems and really work to solve those collaboratively. And that's Rural Life, right? That's really the role of this grant, is to provide this space for us to do this work. All right, so at this point, we'll hand it over to Lindsay. Again, she is our project director from TNTP, and she will continue to lead us forward in this journey.
Great, thank you, Bethany. Hi, everyone. I'm excited to be here today with you all. Thank you for making time at the end of a busy day, almost the end of the week, after a long weekend. So happy to be here with you all and excited to dive in. So what will our work together look like this year? So this year, we're going to work together to build a shared vision of excellent literacy instruction. We're going to dive deeply into your own curricular materials. I know each school, each district, county are using different materials, and engage in ongoing cycles of professional learning over the course of the next few months. And through our sessions, we're going to talk more about our ongoing work together. So today we'll get an introduction, and then over our next 2 sessions, we'll talk a little bit more about what that work will look like. And then we'll kick off our professional learning cycles in January, which we're really excited to do. So today, we're going to spend some time diving into one of TNTP's research papers called The Opportunity Myth. And we're going to, hopefully by the end of this session, there is a lot of technical information and data, so there will be a lot of talking on my end initially, so I apologize in advance, but then we will have opportunities to really dive in and think about how the findings of this report actually can be applied to our own work. So we're going to hopefully understand the findings from this report, understand how these findings impact the students that we all are working with, and understand how we can use these findings to support our students in the classrooms moving forward by taking into consideration how they're experiencing school and what we're putting in front of them. And then next week, we'll have an opportunity to dive deeper into the literacy shifts and the science of reading. And then we'll jump into kicking off our learning cycle 1 in January after the break. So like I said, we're going to spend some time today diving deeper into the opportunity myth. And to kick us off, I want us to spend a few minutes looking at one of the students that we studied in the opportunity myth. This student's name is Luz. On page 1, you will see an introduction to this student. So I want you to take page 1, of your note packet. So I want you to take about a minute to read that, 1 or 2 minutes. And then in breakout groups, we're going to discuss the following questions. I want you to think about the students that you know in your schools, in your district, in your classroom, and think about Luz's profile and how it compares to those students that you know. What about her experience in school stands out to you? And then we'll come back together in about 6 minutes and discuss kind of what we reflected on and what we talked about in our breakout room. So John, our breakout room master, will break us out into random groupings, and then we'll come back together in about 6 minutes.
And Lindsay, just a reminder, so folks, our participant materials for today are on the website.
Yep.
So if you, I think I dropped that in the chat earlier. So under resources, you'll find kind of a general resource page, but then you'll find one that's tagged network launch, and everything we need is there.
Perfect.
Now listen, don't sit there and say, oh, I can't find that. Oh man, send me a private message, do something, and I can get you what you need. No worries.
Most people back. I would love to hear from 1 or 2 people about your reflections, what you talked about in your group after you read Luz's profile.
We talked in our group about how no matter really what grade that you're in, the kids think that they're prepared, but they're really not prepared, and they realize that after they've been in your class for a little while.
Any other reflections?
We talked about how trying to find a balance of challenging those kids in the classroom that are really those deeper thinkers, and they want more, but it's really hard to, keep them pulled in and challenged while you're trying to reach, the middle of the road. And then we also talked about homework and how she mentioned that when she got to high school, she started making D's and C's, and how in middle school, it's so hard to try to get them to understand the value of homework because they just won't do it. They're not concerned about the grades, they're not concerned about getting a bad grade on it. They don't care. But when they're here, you could do so much more if you could get them to do some homework at home.
Yeah. So, Catherine, are you going to say something?
Yeah.
Yeah, go ahead.
Thank you. Our group talked about they could see the emerging importance of relationships and what that could mean to the student.
Yeah, so I think these are all really good reflections. And what I want us to do as we're going through and learning more about Luz and some other students from the report is think about your own students and try to make those connections also. So in the interest of time, we're going to keep going, but we'll have another opportunity, several opportunities to talk further about what we're seeing and noticing. So in September 2018, we, TNTP, published the Opportunity Myth, which was our 6th national report. We came to this national report like we do most of our reports, through our work on the ground with students in schools. So over the past couple of years, we've been helping clients make the transition to more rigorous state standards. And while people are reporting that they're working hard to try to make these shifts, our reviews of more than 2,700 classrooms around the country, we found that only 2 in 3 classrooms are not, our classroom assignments are not rigorous enough to prepare students for college, and that 3 in 4 teachers aren't yet adapting the way they teach to meet these high academic standards. So as we looked at this, we began to wonder, well, how are students experiencing this gap, right? If teachers are not able to do this pretty consistently, how is this affecting students? And so we thought, rather than trying to infer, we would just go ahead and ask them. So today we're going to look at a few different students. I have picked random people in this group to be different students throughout this session. So if I call your name, I want you to just write down what student you are. There's going to be 5 of you. And when I call on you, you're going to read the slide pretending you're the student. So first we'll have Isaac, who will be Kara W. Later in the session, we'll have Hajima, which will be Sherry C. Raymond will be Scott J. Luz will be Christy T. And Maggie will be Misty M. If for some reason there is an issue with that, just let me know. We'll try to find a different person. So Isaac, Kara, can you read this slide for me?
I would love to, Lindsay.
Thank you.
Okay, students like Isaac. Isaac, 17, attends a small public high school in the western part of the country. He plans to attend college to study nursing and become an RN. I can't give up on this dream that I've had since I was a little boy. I'm willing to take any chance in my life for this dream. Isaac, 11th grade. Isaac did what school asked of him. Has school held up its end of the deal?
So, thank you. In this report, we're going to tell the story of the opportunity myth through specific stories of 5 students, like Isaac. Obviously, their names have been changed to protect their anonymity, but words that we are sharing with you are their actual own words. We're going to share these stories of students like Isaac, who's a junior who hopes to become an RN after he completes his college degree. As you can see, he's consistently done what school has asked of him, but we wanted to know whether or not school was holding up its end of the deal and had set him up to reach that goal of becoming a registered nurse after college. So even before we started conducting our research, we knew that the answer was no for many, many students. Even though the number of students who enroll in college continues to increase, which is wonderful, many students have to enroll and rack up college debt for remedial courses in college because they weren't prepared for what came after high school. This is especially true for students of color. 66% of Black students and 53% of Latinx students who enroll in college have to take at least one remedial course. Preparing students like Isaac to reach his goal of becoming a registered nurse, and we wanted to understand why this was. We set out to work with 5 different districts. We worked with 3 urban districts, 1 rural, and 1 CMO. And we followed almost 4,000 students and their teachers across the 2016-2017 school year. So we gathered a significant amount of data to paint a picture of what students were actually experiencing when they were in school. We studied 4 specific components of students' experiences that we had hypothesized would really correlate with their academic success. So in each district we partnered with, the K-12 teachers selected 2 of their classes for us to study. And in those classes, we gathered almost 5,000 students' assignments and more than 20,000 pieces of work on those assignments to measure the quality of assignments they had received. We also conducted more than 1,000 hours of full-length observations to determine whether students had access to that strong standards-aligned instruction that are important with the instructional shifts. We also studied student engagement by conducting almost 30,000 in-the-moment student surveys to determine how kids perceive their daily experience in class. And lastly, we collected a teacher survey from every teacher in our study to measure the teacher expectations for their students. Today, you'll have an opportunity to see examples of one example of all of the type of data we collected and start to think about what that means. Our goal by collecting all of this data was to tell a compelling story that helps people understand what students are experiencing in school every day, and ultimately to make recommendations to improve student experience at scale. So what did we find after conducting all of this research? We found that students have clear goals like Isaac and are generally doing what they're asked to in school. In spite of that fact, kids are doing what they're asked, but they're not ready to succeed after school because they spend so much of their time in school without access to those grade appropriate assignments, that strong instruction, that deep engagement, and teachers who have really high expectations for that. This is true for all students, but our students of color and students from low income backgrounds get these resources even less likely than their white and more affluent peers do. And finally, we saw that when kids did have access to these 4 resources, we will see improvements in student achievement, especially for students who started the year performing below grade level. So like I said, we're going to walk through each of these findings throughout our session today. So these findings together add up to what we call the opportunity myth. The opportunity myth is this false promise we as a society make to our students and their families about school. We consistently tell students that if they come to school, do what's asked of them, they will be set up for success in life. But we've deeply misled students and their families about what they're getting in school. And for many students, even though they do what they are asked, they aren't set up to reach their goals that they've set out for themselves. So while we're going over the findings today, I want you to think about what you as a district leader, a school leader, a teacher, a coach can do to make students' opportunities less myth and more reality. So I want you to think about the following as we go through our session today. We're going to think about those 4 key academic resources, which are the quality of assignments, standards aligned instruction, student engagement, and teacher expectations. So I want you to think about, do you know how often students have access to these 4 key academic resources? Are there any of these resources that your community needs to provide more of? And how can you improve in that area? And what supports do you, whether you're a district or a school leader, a coach, a teacher, need to give students to have greater access to these 4 key resources? So everyone has their assignment. So as every time one of these students come up, the person who is assigned that will read just the quote from them, and I will read the other things off the slide. So we're going to introduce you to 5 students. You've already been introduced a little bit to Luz and Isaac. We're also going to look at Hajima, Raymond, and Maggie. All 5 of these students tell stories that reflect these broader expectations we heard from students. So they said, if we come to school and successfully do what's asked of us, we'll be ready to meet our goals that we set out for ourselves. So those concrete goals were not unique to these 5 students that we profiled. We saw that students in our study across districts have big goals for themselves. Almost 95% of them want to attend college, and that finding holds regardless of their race, of their language background, of their socioeconomic background. We also saw that these same students, just like Luz, have concrete career aspirations and are making choices to achieve these concrete goals. And additionally, by the time students get to high school, 70% of them already have concrete career goals. Some of your middle schoolers already may have them. And most of these, 70% of these career goals actually require students to get a 4-year degree. So we heard from students, we saw the evidence that they expect school will set them up to reach their goals if they do what's asked of them. We saw that kids are consistently doing what we ask. 88% of the time, students are working on activities related to the class. 71% of the time, students met the expectations of assignments they were given. 83% of them earned A, B's, and C's in ELA, and 78% of them earned A's, B's, and C's in math. We also saw, excuse me, we also saw that evidence that we've actually been dishonest with students about how well prepared they are to reach these goals. So when we graded the assignments, we asked ourselves if they met the demands of the assignment. And initially, yeah, 71% of the time they did meet those demands. But then we graded them again. Yes, you can imagine we graded each assignment 2 times. And the second time we graded these assignments, we asked ourselves if students not only did they meet the demands of the assignments, but did they meet the demands of the standards? And at that point, we were only able to say that 17% of the time they were meeting the demands of the standards through those assignments. So that 54 percentage point gap is full of assignments that did not give kids a chance to meet the demands of the standards. That means that kids are getting good grades and succeeding in content that is not actually helping them or building that ladder to help them succeed in college. Those grades are also communicating to their parents that they're on track to be successful, when that may not actually be the case. So it's not because kids couldn't successfully engage with standards aligns assignment, because across our sample, when kids were actually given a chance to try grade level work, students rose to the bar of their grade level assignments more than half the time. This was true across demographic groups: students of color, students from low income backgrounds, students with IEPs, students who are English language learners. In all of these groups, students can and do meet the bar when we give them a chance to do so. So in spite of the fact that kids are often getting low quality assignments, when we just look at the assignments that gave kids a chance to meet these standards, we saw that all kids can really be successful on grade level assignments when we give them a chance to work on them. So just let that sink in. Regardless of their background, their ability level, when we give them these assignments, they are able to be successful at them. But for most of the time, for most of the students, we don't give them those chances. So we hypothesized, like I said earlier, and identified these 4 key components that we think influence the outcomes that students achieve in the school year. So we talked about grade level assignments, making sure that we're giving students assignments that give them a chance to meet the demands of the grade level standards. That we're using strong instruction that asks students to do the majority of the thinking about grade level content. That students are deeply engaged, students are involved, sharing what they have found, sharing that they found what they're working on to be interesting, to be enjoyable, that they were concentrating deeply on what was put in front of them. And also making sure that we had teachers who had high expectations for their students, which teachers who reported that they believed their individual students could meet the demands of rigorous standards and do grade level work. Most kids, though, don't get regular access to even one of these 4 things. That is especially true for our students of color, those from low income backgrounds, ELL students, and students with IEPs. These 4 resources really did make a difference when we looked at our students across our samples. So we created a growth model right here to explore the impact on students if they had consistent resources or consistent access to these resources over time. And it really did make a difference. You could see here, students grew more when they had access to these resources. Students, for example, made 2.5 more months of academic progress when they reported being engaged in class, 4.6 months more of academic progress when their teachers had high expectations. So these things really do matter. And this is especially true for students who come in below grade level, who start the year out below grade level. Students who start the year behind grew significantly more when they had access to grade appropriate assignments, when they had strong instruction, deep engagement, and teachers with high expectation. So this flies in the face of the implicit narrative that we often hear, saying that students who are behind can't do work at grade level. We found out that is actually not true. So unfortunately, though, we didn't see many cases where kids had consistent access to these resources. So we're going to walk through each of these 4 resources today, spend some time in breakout rooms, looking at samples and thinking about the implications. And we're going to first start with these grade appropriate assignments. Students spend roughly 720 hours in their core classes. We estimate that kids spend about 530 of these hours on assignments that are not actually appropriate for the grade level, so way more than half of that time. So that's really worrying for a student like Hajima. So Sherry, can you read Hajima's quote, please? There's a 12th grade student. Thank you.
I don't want to feel like I'm behind when I walk into a class on the first day of college. The teacher is not going to wait for me. Hajima, 12th grade.
Thank you. Yeah, so she's worried. She communicated that she knows her college professors aren't going to wait for her if she's not ready, if she's not college level ready. She's also worried that she didn't get access to grade appropriate assignments consistently when she was in high school. So let's actually look at some of those assignments. So we found this is a lot easier to illustrate when you can see contrasting examples of what students experienced. So here, this is in an 8th grade classroom. They're using the district adopted curriculum, EL or expeditionary learning. And students had the chance to read A Mighty Long Way, My Journey to Justice at Little Rock Central High School. And then they were asked to write an informational essay analyzing the ways in which the press affected the events in Little Rock. So this assignment allowed students to fully meet the depth of multiple standards for the grade level while also building knowledge of the world in a really meaningful way. And then we look at another 8th grade classroom. So the same exact grade, actually in the same district. And students read a 5th grade level text called Billy and Oyster Project. Students then completed a multiple choice vocabulary questionnaire and filled in vowels on a word completion activity. So clearly, you guys are all educators. You know that this is not aligned to any 8th grade standards, literacy standards. And in fact, it's not aligned to any literacy standards in any grade. Kids don't even need to read a text to be able to complete the activity. So most of this variation we saw was from class to class within a school. So this actually was the same school, 2 different 8th grade classrooms, and students are having very different experiences. So it's not school to school or district to district. This is a real example of disparity under one roof. And we see this all the time in our work, not just in these 5 places we visited. So one reason for this wide variation between student experiences, even within the same school, the same district, may be the significant amount of time teachers spend creating their own assignments. So teachers told us that they create or select more than half of their own instructional materials. Actually, 57% of the time they do this. They spend an average of 7 hours per week doing this, but teachers selected or created assignments are less likely to actually be standards aligned than materials identified by districts or states. So materials that you are using in your own schools and your own districts. So what I want us to do now is we are going to open our participant packet back up and look at the second page. This is an example of an assignment that Luz had in one of her class. So I want you to look at the assignment that Luz worked on during this day. We shadowed her, as well as the ELA assignment protocol. If you would like to, that's another resource within the Google Drive that Bethany shared with you. And know whether you felt like this assignment feels grade appropriate. Is there high quality text? Is the text grade appropriate? Are students asked to use details from the text to support their thinking? And does the assignment ask students like Luz to analyze text using evidence to demonstrate deep comprehension? So John is going to send us once again to random breakout rooms with random participants. We're going to spend about a minute or 2 looking over the assignment, and then 5 minutes to actually discuss. And John will bring us back at 4:20. Jump right in. So in my breakout room, there was some really good discussion. So I'd love to hear what your reactions or thought was to this assignment that she had. Was the text high quality and grade appropriate? Was the task text dependent? Did she even need to read the text to complete the task? What are your thoughts? I'll take 1 or 2 people.
Our impression was just sort of that this text maybe seems more on par with like 7th grade work. That's kind of where we landed in terms of range, but prompt is not super text reliant. In fact, it kind of reads a little bit like a narrative or an opinion piece. So it didn't really require her, especially in 11th grade, to really analyze what she was reading and then use that information in her own writing.
Yeah, thanks. Did anyone have similar thoughts, different thoughts? Love to hear.
Yeah,
So
I would agree with. Go
Sorry.
ahead. Sorry.
I don't even think it's appropriate for middle school. I think it's too young. It's asking more, why do people lie? I mean, that's just someone's opinion. You know, asking kids to just basically, why would you do this? When else have you seen this? You know, I think that's more for like elementary school as far as the questions go. Maybe not the text per se, but the questions to me are very elementary.
And we would agree with that also. Basically, what we were talking about in our group is that we see a text with questions that I would not even as a student have to read the text to be able to answer. I could easily go through there and put down an answer, and my teacher would have no idea whether I put any time or effort into that text. So this is not any means on grade level or really what we should be seeing in an ELA class at all.
Yeah,
We
so
didn't discuss,
yeah, go
we
ahead.
didn't discuss this, but I think that if at best, this might be like a icebreaker or a warm-up activity.
Yeah, I think we can all agree that looking at this text, that it is not giving students access to grade appropriate content, right? They're not being set up to meet the standards. You're right. They probably don't even need to read the text to be able to answer any questions. They don't need to use details from the text at all. So I think that this is just an example of how so many assignments that students are being given are actually not appropriate for the grade level and are actually not allowing them to meet the demand of these standards. So we'll see if, if the student, Luz, feels that way as well. How did she feel during this lesson? And we'll have an opportunity to dive deeper into that as we progress through. So thank you guys for that. So yeah, as we shared, we didn't often see students engage in content that was actually aligned to grade level standards. But we didn't hypothesize that content was the only thing that mattered. We know that content does matter, but we also thought that how students were actually engaged in that content mattered. So we used observations to gather information about instruction. We consistently saw in our full-length observations, in all of our observations, we really stayed from first bell to last bell. We were there the whole time. We saw that students rarely experienced rigorous instructional practices or even had the chance to do the deep thinking in the lesson, even in cases where this content was on grade level. So of the 899 observations that we conducted in core classes, only about 295 of them offered students the chance to engage in grade level content. And only 74 of those actually asked students to do the thinking about that grade level content. As you can imagine, that's really frustrating to some students like Raymond. So Scott, can you read Raymond's quote, please?
Sure. I think math is kind of fun, says Raymond in 5th grade.
Perfect. But in his math class, he and his classmates are repeatedly interrupted and corrected by their teacher. And eventually, Raymond, who really likes math, rests his head on his desk. So experiencing that kind of instruction is really frustrating for kids like Raymond, who's a 5th grader. Students really like math, right? Raymond really likes math, but he consistently attempts to share his thinking in his math class and was never able to actually do so. And this was really frustrating for him. What we're going to do now is we're going to actually look at Luz and how did she feel that the class went, how did she, we're going to look at the observation notes and see what actually happened during this class. So we're going to give everybody, again, a minute or two to read the 3rd page, the classroom observation notes in your packet. And then again, give us about 4 minutes to discuss what we noticed in this walkthrough tool. Does the classroom instruction and the questioning lead students to greater comprehension of a meaningful text? Are students doing most of the work and the thinking in the classroom? We saw that a lot of students are not able to, are not giving opportunities to. Is Luz actually given opportunities to do this? So John, you can put us in our breakout rooms. We'll come back together at 4:32.
Okay, breakout rooms are opening.
Awesome. Page 3 of your notes. Most people are back. I was able to join a different group this time. I love hearing the different perspective. So what did y'all talk about? What did you take away from this after looking through the observation notes?
In my group, we just talked about how disjointed the whole thing seemed. We really didn't understand how they would write an essay from these 3 short questions. It also seemed kind of confusing that they would, on Monday, be practicing planning out their timing when they were supposed to test on Wednesday. And we also said that it just would seem like a really boring day. I said I would have been one of the students on my phone during this class period.
Yeah, so when we think back to those questions, does the classroom instruction and questioning lead students to greater comprehension of a meaningful text? And are students doing most of the work and thinking? What are your thoughts, everybody, on that?
Well, Shannon and I had a good discussion about, would it be interesting to ask the students at the end of the class, and we got cut off where we could finish, what were you all learning today? I could hear students saying, oh, we read something or wrote a little bit. Obviously, there was no focus on any kind of standard or goal or today we will, or no essential question, anything like that addressed.
Yeah, any other one final thought? We'll obviously, as you can imagine, have an opportunity to see what Luz's perception was of this class as a student in the classroom, but any other thoughts that y'all had as you looked at this, as you discussed, as you reflected?
I feel like, why didn't they talk about those 3 questions from last year as a whole group? Or, they didn't even talk about them at all. So what's the point of looking at stuff from last year if as a teacher, you're not even going to talk about it with your kids,
Yes. Oh, go ahead.
Well, I was just going to say, we kind of chit-chatted a little bit about, the teacher saying that we're going to prepare for the AP assessment. It can cause a lot of anxiety for people, and kids in particular, that if they're in a practice mode, or if this is the first time they're doing it, this could kind of make or break their attitude about their ability to participate effectively in this class based off how well what their feedback is that she says she's going to provide back to them. And so it kind of, it may seem kind of piddly on some levels, but then at the same time, I would be that child that would have been in this class that if I had not done well, I would have felt like I could not be an AP, and that wouldn't necessarily be the case here because there was no processing through the text itself or using the literary tools that we do as readers to make sense of what's going on, or there was no focus on that. And so I felt like, it kind of was a raw assignment that's giving kids maybe a lot of negative feedback that's not accurate, that could be different.
Yeah, those are some, oh, sorry, go ahead.
That's okay. Lindsay, I kind of want to piggyback on what Sarah and Catherine said. Our group identified several of the same things. One, what was even the standard? What were they going toward? What was the goal? If the end's in mind, what is the goal? Because it kind of seemed like they were a little nebulous. But then also, we were a little disconcerted that this was an AP assignment. And I think the question assumes that it's a meaningful text and that we're leading students in instruction and questioning toward greater comprehension of something meaningful. And we just didn't find that at all. We had several questions. The whole observation left us with several questions at the end. And one even said, if this were an observation, this would not have gone well with my admin. So we were just a little, we were left questioning many things. We'll put it that way.
If I could add to that, I'm sorry, can I just say,
yes, of course.
That's I know there are a lot of questions, obviously, everyone, even our group, everyone's like, wait, what? But I'm curious, again, because I'm not trying, I would hate to think that I would be criticizing another educator, but I wonder if this lesson wasn't something that was a continuation from the day before. Again, what were these 3 AP questions from the year before? Were they introduced in the previous class period? And so when they came in on this day, it was like, hey guys, this is what you're going to do. Or was that teacher note, when you look at the observations and the teacher text, was that genuinely all that was spoken in that whole class period? You know, was that the word for word transcript, if you will? And
It
if
was
that's the
actually,
case,
yes.
it was. Okay.
Yes, it was.
So then I guess, you know, again, I do have to say, we were, even in our group, we were very confused in looking at that, and how you could give one assignment one day asking about lying and very basic questions, and then provide another one with, here are the questions from last year's test, go ahead and develop a thesis and then write about it, you know. And you have to assume that these students know what these terms are and know what it is that they're looking at as well. And so yes, I mean, again, very incongruent, I think.
I think I was also wondering the same thing, Megan, wondering, was it a direct transcript? And so knowing that it is, it's really striking that the lack of student commentary, there were no questions, there was nothing. They just all got started with their work and didn't say anything. And that's, wow, not how my classroom typically went.
Yeah,
Well,
I mean,
that perception versus
sorry, go ahead.
reality, you know, they're not really, there's a lot for the student to perceive in terms of their ability. And there's a lot of space that the teacher's allowing them to fill in terms of, you know, where we are, what skills have we learned up to this point in that introduction that we're applying. And it just seemed procedural, which I think it goes back to what Megan was saying. I mean, there's always a time and place for practicing procedures and practicing assessment environments and that kind of thing. But even that, like, there's not really a look for it. It's like, here's the process, go for it. Is this a cold assessment? We're just kind of trying to, even if this is a starting place, like, don't worry, this may seem overwhelming, you know, we're going to do the whole process today, and we're going to break it down and work through this over the course of the year. I mean, there wasn't really a setup like that in the teacher dialogue. So again, I tend to be that oversensitive student. It makes me wonder, you know, if the students leaving this felt like they were either not going to make it in the class this year, or, you know, there could be a lot filled in there, and it could be negative self-talk, which is what I would be worried about.
And as educators, we can't just always assume what our students know or don't know. We have to have success criteria for them to reach towards our end goal, our focus. And we always have to, you know, state that at the very beginning, state it in the middle, state it in the end, so we know where we're going, and so they know where they're going.
Yeah, and I see a chat in the comment that someone said that, yes, students were carrying some of the lift, but the lift didn't really seem worthwhile. So I think that we can all agree, based on all of our comments and our discussions, that this experience wasn't really such a strong one for Luz or her classmates. And I think that is unfortunately all too common when we did some observations. So yeah, we know that their experiences aren't strong. And I shared earlier, we gave students those in the moment surveys to ask them about the experience they were having in class when they were actually taking that survey. And we heard consistently from students that their experiences weren't all that engaging or worthwhile. Like someone just said, it wasn't worthwhile. So this was especially true for those middle and high school students. As we saw a consistent drop in engagement, someone said they would be that student on the phone. We probably, you know, we saw a lot of students disengaging from the lesson, and their perceived worth from 3rd to 12th grade of the lessons and of what they were doing in their class really, really dropped. So this is not fair. This is not fair to students. We are not giving them opportunities or experiences in their classroom that are strong. And students like Isaac are feeling that it's unfair. So Kara, what are you thinking as Isaac?
Some classes are really dry. You take nothing but notes. That's not going to help me learn what I need in the long term.
Exactly. So Isaac, as well as a lot of other students we talked to, are frustrated by the lack of deep engagement in their classrooms. Isaac doesn't feel that these classes where he's disengaged are actually setting him up for success in the long term. So what did Luz actually feel during this class. So we're going to do the same sort of thing. We're going to look at the next page in our packet, which I believe is the 4th and 5th page. And you're going to look at, excuse me, the survey that Luz completed during the observation we just read about. What does her engagement tell us about this academic experience that she had? And what could the teacher have done to engage Luz more deeply in the lesson? So let's take about a minute or two to review. Then let's get in our groups and discuss and come back together. John, I'm in a different time zone, so you guys are in Eastern, 4:50. 4:50. Great. So what were
also know that I wasn't getting done. I told you.
Hi, sorry guys. Yeah, so what were your reflections? What did her engagement tell us about the academic experience she had in this classroom? And what, if you were this teacher, could have engaged her more deeply in the lesson? What might you have done? What came up in your groups?
We talked about how there was a lack of personal connection. To me, she felt like she wasn't really involved in the class. She didn't seem valued. And so she lacked value in the class, I guess, if that makes sense.
I'm curious about what motivates her intrinsically, because if you look, she says, I don't feel successful, right? She said she didn't feel successful. But as far as this lesson or whatever it was that she did that day, applying to her life and being able to use it outside of class, she said mostly true, right? I think is what it said. I don't have it pulled up right now, but being able to use something outside of school, if she doesn't feel successful, I wonder where's her motivation? How is she motivated? Again, I wonder about her as well, just the type of learner that she is in general.
Lindsay, we sort of talked about that in our group, the idea of a culture of compliance versus a culture of learning. And if I was an administrator walking in, I would think kids are doing the doing. For the most part, they're all engaged, but getting to that deeper root of what are we actually having them do? In this case, it sort of almost was like a fear base of, well, you're going to need to know this, and you need this for the assessment, and you need this for your future. But the idea of great instruction, right? Engagement being a byproduct of great instruction, that when great instruction is there, it's this culture of learning, and we're all in it together. And we're going to make sure that we're ready for the next step, whether that's a test or that's for life or the next class.
Yeah, it definitely resonates with me.
I think most of these students at this age, our students learn at a very early grade how to play the game and slide under the radar, do what's expected, no more, no less. And you will see this a lot I think in AP classes and things where the students are there for the grade and those kinds of things. They're just going to move on through.
Lindsay, can I ask a follow-up question to what Derek was sharing there?
Yeah.
Because I think in some way you could look at this example and say, well, I mean, they need to practice writing an essay. You know what I mean? Like you would provide them with some opportunity to practice. But then on the flip side, like at the end of that time of practice, in what ways did I as a teacher facilitate a deeper engagement so that they left the practice with either an improved skill or a chance to get some feedback from a peer or from me as the teacher, or to in that moment feel like, when she said, or in the survey, it said maybe she didn't feel successful. Maybe she didn't get any feedback. And so she wasn't sure, like, am I successful or not? I don't know. I did this thing, I turned it in, and maybe I'll know tomorrow. But just in a way, like, how do we provide a chance for practice, but also let it be like facilitated in such a way that it's not just, I'm in this by myself as a student, but the teacher's also part of that practice in some way. I don't know. It just has me wondering about providing a chance to practice, but also how to maybe further direct it as a teacher.
Well, it made me, Bethany, to exactly your point, it made me think, and to what Derek was talking about, like, law, have mercy. This woman has just let them go and do the writing process, and she's going to have to give them feedback on all this now, bless her heart. She's going to have to grade all this. She'll have to grade all this work. And it sounds like whatever rubric the AP people are using, that's what she's putting herself up with, now I have to read the essay, not for, and again, this is so cheesy, but not for my ROI, my return on my instructional investment, but she's going back and looking for, everything, the procedural components and the content components of what it is they're writing, and possibly grammar. So not that that's not going to happen, but like you said, how do I know from that what I need to do next if I'm not aligning it to what we've already done? But yeah.
Yeah.
I felt bad for her going into the grading of that as well.
Yeah, thank you for all those reflections, and wondering not only how the students feel, but what expectations does the teacher have as they're going into creating a lesson, planning a lesson like this, getting ready to teach a class like this. So we're going to spend some time talking now about the expectations that this teacher actually had when she planned out this lesson. So finally, we found that teachers with the high expectations were a resource that really mattered, in addition to those other resources we've talked about so far. So we surveyed teachers to gauge kind of their knowledge, not only of the standards, but their support for the standards and their expectations for their student success. So we found that teachers mostly supported the content of the standards, but oftentimes those same teachers did not believe that their particular students could be successful against these demands that the standards were outlining. So in keeping with the other external research, we found that teachers of color had higher expectations for classes that were composed of mostly students of color than white teachers did. So, this has an effect on students, and this matters to students like Luz. So Christy T, can you read Luz's quote, please?
Okay. The teachers that have high expectations for you in their class, you actually try harder because you want to show you can meet those expectations.
Yeah, so students like Luz can actually tell if teachers believe they can be successful in rigorous work. And when they believe that their teachers believe in them, they work harder when they experience those high expectations. And that's really important to remember. So what we're going to do now is we're going to actually look at what Luz's teacher shared with us about her expectations for the class. So I want you to look at the 6th page, the teacher survey in your packet, and think about what stands out to you about Luz's teacher's expectations. How do you think these expectations may have influenced Luz's experience? Are expectations keeping this teacher from providing his or her students with stronger academic experiences? And if not, what supports might this teacher need? We're actually going to do a quicker breakout this time to make sure we get to everything. So John, if you could bring us back at 5:02, that would be great. So guys, what stands out to you about the teacher's expectations, and how might these expectations have influenced Luz and her classmates' experiences?
Okay, all rooms are closed now.
Okay, everyone's back. Yeah, so guys, I would love to hear what stands out to you about Luz's teacher's expectations and how those expectations might have factored into or influenced Luz's and her classmates' experience in that class.
In our group that we discussed that when she was responding to some of the statements, she kind of contradicted herself. Like when it said students are overburdened by the demands of our state standards, and she's put somewhat agree, but then she goes on to say that the standards make it difficult for students to learn basic skills in my subject, and she put somewhat disagree. So that kind of stood out to us, that she was kind of contradicting herself at the same time.
Yeah, thanks, Amy, for that. Anyone else have similar or other ideas about her expectations and specifically how that might have influenced the experience of the students in that class?
Well, it makes me wonder how she perceives her role in that burden. Oh, I hope I'm not interrupting someone. I was just saying that the overburden, the statement on the students are overburdened by the demands of the state standards, and the one that Amy was kind of just talking about, it's like our state standards are not too challenging, but students are overburdened. It's kind of like she thinks they're fine. The state standards are fine. It's our students that don't get it. You know, that kind of seems to be sort of the vibe. I could be wrong, but that's kind of what I was thinking too. It's like there's something about those two statements, and it kind of leaves me to think that she's not connected her impact on how she can help the overburdened students, or he can help the overburdened students. So.
Thanks, Sarah. Any other thoughts, guys?
I agree.
Denise, if that's Denise, we can't really hear you.
And I don't know if she doesn't even understand.
Or maybe it's
I have
a
connection.
I missed some of that too, Lindsay. I
yeah. No, yeah. Anyone else that wanted to share? I'm sorry that we weren't able to hear who was just trying to talk.
I know, Denise, type that in the chat.
Yeah, exactly.
I don't know too much to type in the chat, but we do want to hear what you have to say.
Lindsay?
Yeah.
Our group, well, they raised an awesome question, and this is not to be disparaging towards the teacher, but we wondered about the teacher's background in AP. Was this a particularly new teacher to the AP class? Because the question remains, did she really truly understand the foundation the students needed and the rigor necessary to complete the kind of prompts required of this particular class? Because, like somebody else pointed out, the incongruency of her answers or his answers, the teacher's answers, just kind of led us to wonder if they really understood the rigor necessary to complete the kind of prompts needed.
So I'm hearing that potentially some expectations, the role, is the teacher really clear on what role they should be playing? Are they aware of what they should actually be teaching? So there's a lot of different things that could actually impact the experience of the students. Anything specifically, if you link what you saw in the teacher survey to what you saw in Luz's responses, anything that you see that could have affected her, Luz, as the student's experience?
I feel like her board statement, I mean, I felt like Luz was like a cat playing with a yarn ball. Like, you know, she knew there was this thing that she had to do that's part of like being successful, being a successful student, and I can play school pretty well, but like, I don't know if I was successful. I don't necessarily feel like I'm not a success, but I feel like, you know, in terms of the group of people around me, based off just my ability to complete that task, you know, I'm feeling okay. Like I can do this, I can stay focused. So I'm probably ahead. Like gamifying her experience even to maybe keep engaged. I don't know.
Yeah, thank you guys for that. And I'm also just looking in the chat. So I think, yeah, that there are, the teacher may not even be understanding her own expectations or the expectations of the standard. Therefore, there's potentially low expectations of what is being asked of students. So there could be a disconnect there. So I think all of what you're saying is spot on. So we're actually going to look a little bit closer at the data of these low expectations and see what that means. So these low expectations that we uncovered also seem to contribute to a mismatch between the grades the students received and how prepared they were to actually demonstrate those skills they needed to reach their goals that they set out for themselves, you know, which consistently, as we talked about earlier, included going to college. So we looked at lots of different assessments, and across all these assessments, including state level assessments, the ACT, the SAT, AP tests, students got signals through their grades in class that they were learning what they needed to, but they did not demonstrate that they were prepared for what came next via their performance on these assessments. So for example, 80% of the students who got Bs, and for that matter, 50% of the students who got As in their AP classes did not actually even pass the AP assessment and earn that college credit, even though their grades had communicated to them that they were on track this entire time. And that's obviously really concerning. So Maggie, Misty, can you quote Maggie here, please?
I feel like everybody's capable of the same thing. I think they can do it just as much as I can do it.
Yeah, so Maggie was worried. She had a genuine belief that all students could be successful if they were given a chance, and they just did not see that they were given that chance consistently enough. So as students like Maggie noted, though we saw that access to these 4 resources that we talked about varied widely from classroom to classroom in the same school, used, for example, in the top quartile of classrooms in each school in our study, students spent an average of about 50% of the time on grade appropriate assignments. And in the bottom quartile classrooms, students spent about 13% of their time on grade appropriate assignments. So that's a big difference. That shakes out to students spending roughly 67 more hours on grade appropriate assignments in some classrooms than others within the same school. That makes me think back to those two 8th grade ELA samples we saw earlier. The same school, but there is such a disparity in what is actually happening in different classrooms. So, however, the chances of receiving these resources just aren't distributed equitably. So in our sample that we looked at, students of color and low-income students were systematically denied access to grade-appropriate assignments, excuse me, or instruction consistently. This means that classrooms made up of mostly students of color or low-income students often had vastly different exposure to these resources than classrooms made up of mostly white students or mostly non-low-income students. So if you look here, classrooms with mostly white students tend to receive 3.6 times more high quality lessons. And classrooms with primarily high income students tended to receive 5.4 more high quality lessons than classrooms with mostly students from low income backgrounds. So consistently, there are less opportunities being afforded. This was even true when we controlled for achievement. So we saw that students from low income backgrounds still received lower quality assignments even when they started at the same performance level as their higher income peers. So even the highest performing low income students get less access to grade level content than the lowest performing high income students. I'm just gonna say that again because that's pretty powerful. Even the highest performing low income students get less access to grade level content than the lowest performing high income students. So let's think about all of this. Putting all of this together, let's talk about lose. Let's spend a few minutes as a group. We can type in the chat, we can share out. Is she being prepared to meet her goals? How could we improve her experience if she was a student within your school or within your district? I'll open up the chat so I can make sure that I'm reading everything in the chat, and also want to, people can just jump right in and share. So again, is she being prepared to meet her goals, and what ways could we improve her experience if she was in our own school? Yeah, people are just astonished by the inequity. It really is sobering and wild. So is Luz being prepared to meet her goals? I mean, yes. So Sarah says no. I'm sure a lot of people agree with, based on everything that we saw, that she's not being set up to meet her goals. So I'd love to hear some thoughts that you might have about what we can do to change her experience. If she was in your school, in your district, what could we change? She's not being challenged. So we want to challenge her more, I see people saying. partly a relationship. Interesting. Does her teacher actually know her goals? And are there ways she can facilitate helping Luz to reach her goals? Yeah. So as Reagan says, she's one of the many students we followed, and her experience is entirely typical of the students we followed. So this is not an outlier. Her experience is what we're seeing pretty consistently. Is the teacher even aware of how to offer equitable instruction? Yeah, people are really thinking the relationship piece is really important. Get to know your students, what their goals are, how to help them facilitate reaching those.
Lindsay, in my group, we talked a little bit about, surprised in terms of expectations that this was an AP class. I mean, sometimes we also think, oh, AP, like ratchet it up, go with it, run. And so to see it there was kind of shocking. But then I made a note in the chat also wondering, like, systemically, how do scheduling students, if we're grouping students, if we're making decisions, to your point about, oh gosh, if I can get the research right, but about the lowest performing high, how did you ever you worded that? Students still got better still got access to more, high quality assignments or activities than the highest performing others, low income student, I think. Like, just how does that, maybe a mindset or even just a bias that we have we might not even be able to know we have. Has that impact how we plan for those students?
Well, and Bethany, that like was setting fireworks off my head, because a group, we were looking at school data at a school I was at, and the only correlation to success or to proficiency, not advanced, but just proficiency on the 10 Ready assessment was whether or not the child had been in the unified classroom. And so when you think about like AP in general, just having access to the content of an AP classroom, even if it's like you were talking about, even if it was on the lower end of instruction, even if, I guess it's kind of goes back to that idea that like good instruction, like the right thing at the right time is better than the wrong thing all the time, even if it's taught well, right? So, I mean, that's what it makes me think about, this idea of like teaching, this concept of teaching up. That doesn't mean testing up and then just keep putting that in front of them after we already know. It's like, what are we going to do to support them to get there? And how often have we consistently, cohesively exposed them with support to the information that helps them sustain that kind of success? And I keep going back to that experience I had where we sat at the table and literally the only students that were proficient on the 10 Ready assessment were the kids that were enrolled in the unified math program. And who had access to that? Only the kids in the unified math program.
Yeah. So I'm hearing and seeing, I love all of the comments in the chat. Like there's a lot of things we need to change. She is not getting the experience she deserves. Are there even resources? Do the teachers have the resources to give her what she needs? Are we actually challenging her? All of these are really important things to think about. And why a lot of this is really sobering news, like we talked about, there really is hope, guys. There is. So if kids got at least 25% of their assignments to be on grade level, 25% only to be on grade level, and they can make the kinds of gains we saw in 1 year on a yearly basis, and we could close the achievement gap. So this means that the achievement gap isn't actually inevitable. It's actually just baked into a system where we give some students lower quality daily experiences than others. So like Isaac, in the spring, Isaac graduated with his class. He's enrolled in nursing school. Is he ready, or has he been misled? Kara, let me hear you.
That diploma means I worked hard. I made it this far through all these years of school. I want to go to college and be a registered nurse. I feel like I'm ready.
Yep. So he feels like he's ready. He got that diploma. He set out to meet the expectations that were outlined for him. But is he actually ready to take on nursing school? Has he been misled, or have we set him up for success? So what would it take to make these opportunities more than just a myth? What would it take to make the promise we make to students that if they come to school and do what they're asked, they'll be set up to reach their goals a reality? There's solutions. So as we begin to think about what these solutions are, it's worth calling out that some of the classrooms and schools we saw in the study that were bright spots in terms of providing all students with greater access to these 4 resources and ensuring that students had higher quality experiences. These schools' classrooms tended to share a few important traits that we want to make sure we talk about. These bright spot classrooms consistently offered students access to grade appropriate assignments and strong instruction. Students were deeply engaged. They were members of a safe, respectful learning environment. They were led by teachers who had high expectations, fundamentally believed and communicated to students they could meet the demands of the rigorous standards. Sometimes such classrooms were operated by amazing individual teachers who, despite being surrounded by low expectations, consistently held high expectations. But more often than not, these teachers were operating within a school that really supported their teachers to reach these heights. So these bright spot schools all seem to share a few common traits. First, they all seem to focus intently and consistently on small, clear set of instructional priorities. That alone can be a big accomplishment. You know that so many schools, I'm sure we've been parts of schools before, where they roll out a new priority every few weeks. But most of all, our successful schools didn't stop there. They coupled their clear vision of excellent instruction and student success with strategic, consistent support and development for teachers. So they had school leaders who came in and observed them, not in an evaluative way, but as a coach, and were able to support them and help them meet this vision. They also ensured that the teachers understood how to address these standards, how to address potential hangups that students may have, how to respond to these misconceptions. And so by setting these commonalities of these like bright spots within schools, we can learn a lot about what we should be focusing on to improve student experiences at scale. It's really also important to note that these classrooms were definitely bright spots, but not all of them were perfect, right? These classrooms offered access to these 4 resources consistently, but even if they were not doing it 100% of the time, doing it consistently 75% of the time made a huge difference. So the exciting thing about being part of this network that you are all a part of is that you can be that bright spot in your school or in your district. So that's something really important to remember. We're not going to pretend that we have all the answers, but we want to make sure that all of the adults whose choices affect students' experiences think about the two following commitments. Every student, regardless of their identity, should have access to the 4 resources we studied every single day in every single class. And in order to make this true, us as adults within this system will have to investigate if that's happening consistently and then report out on the progress. Also, every student and family needs to be an authentic partner. Community engagement is so important. They should have the opportunity to shape the experiences students are having in school and receive accurate information about whether their child is on track to meet their goals. They shouldn't get all A's and then be surprised that their student doesn't pass the AP exam. So to make this true, adults in the system will have to continually seek feedback about that partnership with families. So what we're going to do for the last seven minutes, and then we'll have about 1 minute to wrap up and talk about next steps, is we're going to go into our school groups. I want you to review the action guide, which is in the materials. There's one for leaders and one for teachers, and then discuss with your team where you see the opportunity with playing out within your own community and how you might begin to address some of this in your own work to ensure that students in your community are not having experiences like lose and that they are actually having access to the 4 resources we talked about today. So John is going to break us out into our group and bring us back at, let's say 3:28. So we have at least 5 minutes, and they'll have just 1 minute to share out and then wrap up. I want to make sure I get you guys out on time. I know it's late. So thank you, John, for getting us into our groups, and we'll see you guys back here in about 5 minutes.
Oh my gosh, I was in an exciting group that had great answers. They were awesome.
I know. I'm so sorry. That's the curse and the blessing about sessions like this. There's so much great conversation. And you want to make sure you get to everything, and you hate to cut it off. So I am so sorry about this. I know there's been such great conversation.
Hey, we're continuing the conversation, right?
Yes. Of course. I mean,
Next session.
exactly. This is not going to be the last time we're going to talk about it. So if you guys want to just type in the chat one thing that your group talked about that you're going to try to do, or that you've seen play out in your own community as we wrap up and talk about our next session. I'm going to be looking at the chat so that I can see what you all talked about, and we can build upon it next week as well. So Bethany is going to kind of close us out in terms of what our next steps will be before next Thursday's session.
All righty. So reminder that this launch, again, if it weren't for COVID-19, right, we would have been together in person for like a full day or two, probably, most likely two. So we've kind of broken up this launch experience in the best way we can into 3 sessions. So we'll see you next week, same time, same place, same back channel. All right. And then again in January after a well-deserved holiday break, right? And then continue in kind of our learning cycle with some calls on through the spring. But action items, we're going to be sending you a survey, and it'll be emailed to you from this email address that you see. It's research@tntp.org. I think it's scheduled to come out maybe this evening if I remember. So watch for that. And we really need you to fill it out before the next session. Okay, so did I say really? I think I said really, right? So get that thing filled out, and we think maybe about 10 minutes. So like block yourself off about 10 minutes to do that. Also, linked on the website is that reminder, but also if you look at the launch kind of sub-tab for materials, you'll see a text called The Science of Reading. So take some time to get familiar with that, and whatever way is useful for you. You can annotate it. You can, kind of just read it and reflect, whatever's going to work for you, just so you're familiar with that text before we jump in together next week. And then just kind of a watch for your network MOU, or your memorandum of understanding to be sent. That'll be sent from Brittany Sieber. And once you get that, you'll fill it out and return it back ASAP. For the sake of time, just know that it's coming from Brittany. It'll give you all the information you need to know. But if you have questions, please reach out to us about that. All right. And I apologize for keeping you 1 minute over, but
thank you guys so much. No, thank you guys so much. I'm excited to see you all next week. Anything that comes up, reach out to Bethany or myself. And we're excited to come back together next Thursday, same time, same place.
We'll hang around if you have any questions for a few minutes. Bye, everybody.